For those of you who've played any role-playing games, especially Dungeons and Dragons, this will sound familiar. Of the 6 character attributes, strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma are known as the mental attributes. These attributes, intelligence and wisdom specifically, govern the character's personal ability, internal ability to relate to the world. Intelligence is a character's ability to reason and learn. Wisdom is a character's willpower, intuition, common sense, and general just awareness of their surroundings. Charisma is the force of the character's personality, how well they convey their own points, how well they can convince others of something they believe. Now, keeping that in mind, we're going to focus on the concept of wisdom. Now, we won't be focusing on wisdom in video games, because it's really just comes out as being a number. You have 18 wisdom, therefore you can do X, Y, and Z and cast this many spells. But that's well and good, but it's hard to roleplay that. Gamers have this issue of, how do I act like I have high wisdom? What does wisdom actually look like? How do you be wise? Now, there are many sources of wisdom across the world, and with many sources come many interpretations of how best to live one's life, how to, to use that perception, that willpower, that intuition, that common sense, that ability to be aware of your surroundings for one's best benefit. There are 3 sources I'm going to work on here. Before we get any further, I'm going to apologize wholeheartedly to any Chinese listeners because I'm going to butcher all the names and words I pronounce. I'm going to try my best, but if I don't get it right, I'm sorry. Firstly, we have here the Analects of Confucius. And next, we have the Daodejing. And of course, the Bible. Okay, so we'll start with Confucius. Within the concept or context of Confucian thought, there are 2 aspects that that determine how virtuous, how, I guess, gentlemanly a man is. Native substance is what you're born with. It's your innate abilities, it's who you are without outside interference. Now, cultural refinement is how you develop those native abilities, who you are innately. The master said, when native substance overwhelms cultural refinement, the result is a crude rustic. When cultural refinement overwhelms native substance, the result is a foppish pedant. Only when culture and native substance are perfectly mixed and balanced do you have a gentleman. The wise man, the gentleman, is somebody who lives by ritual. Ritual is very, very important for Confucians. Taking your place in the proper scheme of things, doing things the right way, showing respect as required and receiving respect as required is very important for the social system of Confucianism and ancient China as a whole. Ritual is not just a tool of personal refinement, but a larger social-political tool, which reflects how wisdom is not simply just how to become a gentleman. Wisdom is about how to bring society into a peaceful, non-conflict-ridden existence. There is a concept in Confucianism as well as Taoism, which we will get to later, known as Wu Wei, which is non-active action or non-coercive action. It's very difficult to translate. Doing without coercive force. You don't push things into a box. You perform things the right way. You perform your rituals properly. You act in accordance with virtue, all the virtues that Confucius espouses. And people will follow you of their own accord. Another important feature of Confucianism is filial piety. It's the respect that a child shows to their parents. Well, this concept of filial piety where, people nowadays, as he would say it, think that this is just, I need to take care of my parents, I've done my job. But Confucius says it's not just about how you do it, It's about your demeanor, which is key here. Another feature is this importance of learning. There's much to learn in life. There's much to be, understood. But it's not just to learn, but to understand. If you just take in knowledge, if you just consume all this knowledge, but don't reflect upon it or attempt to understand it, it's really worth nothing. But if you reflect upon nothing without learning, I guess the best way to say this is how to think, then you're in trouble because your thinking will lead you astray. So the master had this insistence on treating everybody with respect. We talked about the requirements of ritual as governance, where through virtue and ritual, the common people will follow the lead of their leader. However, even as these books are written for the elite, for the upper class of China, the governing class, the masters, in his instances, ritual, would share that respectfulness that ritual brought on with all the people. The implication here is that some people would only do this if they were, close acquaintances, your friends, if they were higher up on the social ladder than you, because you wouldn't do it for a commoner because they're not important. But Confucianism says no, that's dumb. You need to do it for everybody equally. There are a few verses which distinguish the wise from the good. The wise look at the world and are actively emotional about things, but those who are good and virtuous in the sense of Confucius are those who practice that wu-wei, that non-active action. So instead of being, caught up by the joys of the world, with the ups come the downs, they evade that stress by just staying in the middle. They're still like a mountain, as opposed to active like water. Taoism, the Tao itself, is not able to be grasped fully. The Tao itself is something that is nameless, formless. It contains within itself all things. From that nameless, formless, amorphous thing comes wisdom. Not in the sense that the Tao provides wisdom. This Tao translating as way. It does not provide wisdom. You do not pray to the Tao and receive wisdom. The Tao is something we should emulate. And in this emulation, wisdom is born. This wu-wei, this non-active action. And it's very similar to the idea that Confucius held, that one should act without force, without coercion. Once again, this book is written for a leader, for the elite. As an analogy, the relationship between the Tao and all under heaven is similar to the way streams and tributaries respond to the river and the sea. It is not because the river and the sea summon them, but because streams and tributaries gravitate to them without being summoned or sought. Repudiate sagehood and discard wisdom, and the people would benefit 100-fold. Repudiate benevolence and discard righteousness, and the people would again be obedient and kind to each other. Repudiate cleverness and disguise sharpness, and thieves and robbers would not exist. This is wisdom that rejects wisdom. Because the Tao is all-encompassing, any concept of X and Y, of opposites, of two things, is a falsehood. And that falsehood causes chaos. And because these dualities are all entirely relative, even the concepts of wisdom and folly, of righteousness and evil, of these kind of things is a social construct, an idea that we impose on the Tao and not vice versa. One must rule without working within concepts of dualities. Avoiding the duality is done in a very specific way for the Taoist ruler. Do not exalt the worthy, and so keep the common folk from contention. Do not value goods hard to get, and so stop the common folk from becoming thieves. Do not let them see the desirable things, and so spare the hearts and minds of the common folk from disorder. So, just simply let those who are able to do. Give them high responsibilities. We don't need to put them on a pedestal and say, look how great Jim is because he's so smart, blah, blah, blah. You just say, okay, Jim, here's a job which you can do because you're really smart. There's a trading card game. It's called Magic the Gathering. It started in 1993, many years ago. Now it's been 20 years. Cards that were printed in the first edition can go from values of, like can go to values of thousands of dollars. Recently, a card was sold for almost $27,000. Now, this is about a card that's like this big, that wide, made of cardboard. You're thinking to yourself, why $27,000? Two reasons. One, the cards, as they were made, it's the first edition of a game, they really didn't get the rules right. They were much more powerful than they should have been. This reason has been more or less counteracted by having them banned in most tournament play. So owning them is no longer like a power that you have. You wouldn't really be able to run it. The other reason, and now this is important, is because they're collector's items. People who buy these cards obviously don't play them. They hoard them. They keep them in like safes. They keep them in airtight like containers. And look at them. They're prizes. And because of this hoarding, they become rarer. And the rarer they get, the more people are willing to pay to have them. This sort of activity makes something that is no longer useful because they've been banned from play have huge value. And this is what Dao was trying to avoid. It's, I'm sorry, my nerd cred's showing, but I let off with quoting D&D, so sue me. So now that we've covered the Confucian and Taoist modes of thinking about wisdom, modes of thinking about their ways of life, we're gonna switch tracks to the biblical one. Like I said earlier, we'll specifically be focusing on the Hebrew Bible. We'll be focusing on books like Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and books, attributed to Solomon. We'll also be looking at the book of Job. These books are written by multiple authors. They've been accumulated over time. So first we'll begin with Proverbs. The book of Proverbs is divided into 3 sections. The first section is written as a description, as a lecture from a father figure to their child. It also does this thing, which the Hebrew Bible will do a lot, where it personifies wisdom as a woman. Likewise does with folly. And it depicts these two women as out in the streets and in their own ways enticing people to come follow their path. The woman of wisdom is out preaching, saying, "Come live with me, come be part of my life. I will set a feast for you." The woman of folly entices people, saying, "Hey, why don't you come back to my place?" And And in the end, that path leads to death. This is a very important distinction. Wisdom leads to life, and folly leads to death. And the source of this wisdom is the fear of the Lord. And these two very important things are. This is a very important distinction that we draw between wisdom as the Hebrew Bible and wisdom within the Eastern cultures, where the source of wisdom comes from outside the human. But at the same time, it is through human activity that wisdom is cultivated. In the Bible, you'll find this emphasis that God can grant wisdom of his own will, an active deity or higher supernatural power, as opposed to the passive ones of Confucianism and Taoism. As it says here, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. So much time is spent in the book of Proverbs based about the roles of people. The second part, which consists of collections of sayings. And these sayings are usually, couplets. They're the best modern term to use is one-liners. Just throw them at you. Like the proverbs we know as of today, a rolling stone gathers no moss. The last section is really short. Very short. It discusses a woman who engages in, rather mundane activities. This is about somebody who maintains that daily life kind of thing. And because of this, her children rise up and call her happy, her husband too, and he praises her. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceitful, beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Now, once again, it brings it back to the fear of the Lord. But based on the language, based on the fact that it was written for an elite, for those who could read, to be preached to the people of Israel. So it would come down through the hierarchy, if you will. And this is very much as opposed to the Analects and the Daodejing, which existed for the elite to read themselves. So now we move on to the book of Ecclesiastes. This is another book attributed to Solomon. It talks about Well, it talks about a lot of things that might not immediately make sense. There's the realization that, we're all going to die. Whether we follow wisdom or folly, whether we're good or evil, whether we do things right or not. It starts off with this: vanity of vanities, says the teacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And it would say, for in much wisdom is much vexation, and those who increase knowledge increase sorrow. Considering the last book where Proverbs, wisdom means good, folly means bad, wisdom means life, folly means death. If you don't follow the wise path, things are going to go terribly for you. No matter how well you can see, you're still going to die. And it's kind of morbid, and this is also likewise a thing where everything has its time. That's another theme of this book, where there's a place and a time for everything. There's no answer of, okay, wisdom is better than folly, but what do we get out of it in the end? And it will say nothing, but even then, do we really just get nothing out of it? It also will say to fear the Lord, to follow the Lord. But do we get anything? But is there a purpose? And they'll say, you know what, no, in the end you're all going to the same place. And it very much is deal with life as it comes, take life as it comes, deal with things now because there's a place and a time for everything. But it also makes the point of saying that we really just don't. That might just be because even though we're wise, we just don't get it because God's ways are so much further above ours. Even if you are the wisest of the wise, as Solomon is, you just don't understand what God's plan. Now, what do we take from this kind of book? What do we take from a book that says everything is silly? Some would say that the reward for wisdom and folly may not come in this life, but the next. And some would likewise say, this is the writings of someone who understands that life is not something we understand, but that God understands and everything happens for a reason, but we can't perceive it. So finally, we're going to talk about the Book of Job. This is also in the line of Ecclesiastes for being a unique book that doesn't tell, basic wisdom, that doesn't show basic biblical wisdom. It shows complicated, challenging wisdom. So the simple premise of Job is not like Proverbs, which is poetic in time, it consists of sayings and short, and lectures and such things. It is not like Ecclesiastes, which is very much written like a memoir. It's, I have seen this and I have seen that, and this is how it is. The Book of Job is a story. It has a plot, and it leads off as such. Job is a God-fearing man. He does everything that's required of him. He's a good guy. The denizens of heaven show up before God, and Satan among them says, hey, this Job guy, if you take all that stuff, I bet you he'll denounce you. And, God says, cool, I'll do it. Ruins Job's life by killing off his servant, afflicting him with sores, ruining this guy's life. And then his three buddies show up, and they see him in this intense state of mourning. And then it switches from being prosaic to very much poetic. And here we begin with the three friends of Job telling him off, essentially. They say, hey, you must have clearly been a bad guy, because if you weren't a bad guy, this wouldn't happen to you. Bad things happen to bad people, right? And he says, whoa, I didn't do anything wrong, this just happened, I can't. And he defends himself, and then they accuse him of other things. They say, you're blaspheming against God because you're clearly just blaming him for your troubles. What's wrong with you? Don't you know that you just get what you deserve? And it goes on as such, that it's this back and forth. Much of the argument is that Job cannot discern the ways of God, because he says, hey, well, God clearly did this to me, what's his deal? I demand answers. And they say, hold on, buddy, who do you think you are? You're immortal. Who are you questioning the creator of the universe? And this is a twist here. God himself appears before Job, and God very much reiterates the who do you think you are, buddy, kind of status here. And Job essentially goes, you know what, I screwed up. And he gets everything he wanted back. He got, not even wanted. He gets everything he had back twofold. This book is another book that we have to struggle with, because it's complicated in the sense that we really don't know what's right or wrong here. On the one hand, the friends are falsely accusing Job, but they raise the point that God punishes the wicked. But on the other hand, Job says, well, clearly that he doesn't, and he's punishing someone who's good. And, what's going on here? And there's this larger message that comes from both this book and Ecclesiastes, where we as humans, we as mortals, have no idea what's going on. We are entirely out of our depth, and I think that's the wisdom there, that this grand knowledge we may have, this ability to articulate ourselves, these truths that we may know, junk. If the universe is a place where both the wise and the foolish are rewarded equally in, the end, and while the evil can, things go well for them sometimes, the good things go terribly for them, is there a purpose to being good? Is there a purpose to being as faithful as Job was in the face of terrible adversity? Is there a point in searching for wisdom as the teacher does in Ecclesiastes? And then this leads to, is there a point in following the religious aspect where we should worship God? The fear of the Lord as being a source of wisdom, should we be worshiping God? Because if we don't get anything out of it, what's the point? Do we do it anyway? Should we be religious without reward or punishment? Or without thought of them at least? Because those are, as sometimes it seems, arbitrary. Okay, now after looking at all these books, what do we conclude? There are obvious things that are shared. Filial piety is something that both Confucianism and the Hebrew Bible share. And it's, it shows, and the concepts of virtue in that sense, where it's kindness and being good to people and treating others with respect and that kind of thing, shared. Very much shared. But there's also a next step of virtue in the Hebrew Bible where virtue is also this subservience of its obedience to God. And it's also this following of His precepts, not just the precepts of traditions of the traditional rituals that were passed down from former kings. It's traditional rituals as given to us by God. In the Taoist sense, it's a challenging thing to look at, because making yourself low and being passive is very much the opposite of what God wants us to do. We are to be active in our worship of Him, doing things. But at the same time, we are not to exercise our will, because our will is second to His will. And that dynamic of what the Taoist looks at as wise, which is being lower, being passive, being, soft and pliable, being undiscernible, are usually things. Being undiscernible is something given to God, but being low and passive and weak and soft is something given to us, because that is how we react to the undiscernible, like we react to what doesn't make sense to us. Confucianism shares parallels with the Hebrew Bible, while Taoism can be seen as a sort of antithesis, active and passive. The emphasis of weakness in relation to God, in relation to the higher power, but the emphasis of weakness in relation to lower powers. But this Confucianism is this very weird middle place between the two, where one should be passive in how they act, where if you are virtuous yourself, those who are around you who are lesser than you will be virtuous. You shouldn't be virtuous by doing nothing or by being weaker. You should be virtuous by following rituals, by practicing virtuous acts, and by being involved in culture, being involved in the world. Very much the same thing the Bible would say, where following ritual is, observing the laws written in the Torah. Virtue, following the commands of the Lord again. And the idea of, taking your place in the world. And it's very much, Confucianism is about order, as is the Hebrew Bible. Taoism is about, it's a sensical chaos. I'm not trying to, find a synthesis between the three ideas. That's not what my plan is. I don't expect that there is a synthesis. Even still, we can learn from them as ourselves. If you can still take things from Taoism, even though it might sound polar to you. And that's really what we should take from it.